Hi friends! Welcome to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Katelyn and I like to film eyeshadow palette, ranking, and review videos, as well as the occasional other content sprinkled in. So if you like indie makeup, if you like eyeshadow palettes, if you like other beauty content, or me as a person in general, I highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button because I post 2 videos every single week. That's a goal. It's not happening currently, but I'm hoping to re-up that. Anyways, for those of you that are not new here, my face is happy that you are seeing it again. And no lipstick in my teeth. Today, I have a double feature for you. And really it's more of like a combined feature. So I failed to rank and film my July eyeshadow palettes that I used in July. For those of you that are new here, I rank every palette that I use, not just the new to me palettes, but every palette that I use in a month. So for July, the boat came, gone, went, and now it is September, so it's time to do August. So I thought I will just rank every eyeshadow palette that I used in July and August and give you my thoughts on them. So this is going to be a long one. Strap in, get ready, get cozy, get comfy, and let's go ahead and get on into it. Super quick housekeeping things for those of you that are new here. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And also, if you have never seen these videos before, I have 4 categories. I am incapable of keeping track of how many palettes and doing all that, so I don't count down, but I could go into 4 categories. The first category is palettes that I'm like, I don't really like them. You know, like I'm just like, meh, all right, they're all right. But they're not like, I just don't really like them that much. Next category are palettes that I like and they're okay, but they're just not like, they're not doing it for me. You know what I mean? And then the third category are palettes that I really like. Like I like them a lot, possibly even love them, but they're not quite holy grail favorites. That leads us into the last category, which is holy grail favorites. Palettes that I absolutely love. If anything were to happen to them, I would repurchase them if I could. So anyways, those are the 4 categories, and let's start with the first category. So a lot of these palettes I used in both July and August. A lot of these I also paired with other palettes. Like I don't tend to just stick to one palette when I do my makeup. So there are, I think, 40. If you want an official count, that's going to be in the description box down below. I'm not going to link the products. I will just have my affiliate codes and links down below. So if you want to shop through those, I would greatly appreciate it. And then I will just put links to any palettes that I have dedicated video, not necessarily dedicated, any palette or any videos I have that feature a look with that palette, just in case you're looking for some inspiration on the palette. So definitely check out the description box below. Anywho, let's get started. So at the bottom, I have the BPerfect Cosmetics Manifest Dream Big palette. I got this in a Snarls box. If you don't know what Snarls box is, they're popular, I feel like, on TikTok, but it's a beauty box where you can fill out a bunch of information and they sort of curate a box for you. I don't know if I requested this palette specifically, but I wanted to try more BPerfect, and this was after I had gotten the Carnival Interstellar palette, and I sort of became obsessed with BPerfect. So I got this palette. This color story, it's like a lot with no cohesion. I don't see a vision when I reach into this. Like what I've been doing with this when I use it is like the occasional shade, and I sort of have to like force myself to use it. So yeah, I'm gonna end up decluttering this one, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There's something about it that I just don't quite, jive with. Next up, we have the Gourmande Girls and Cosmic Peachezz palette. This is the virtual palette. They had 2 different collab palettes that they did for the Ice Cream Beauty box in like June, May, something like that. Anyways, this is what the palette looks like. It's pretty. Like the quality of the shadows is really nice. I think this color story would be a really fun color story for a lot of people, but for me, I don't feel like it's adding a whole lot to my collection, so my feelings on it are kind of like, Next up, we have the Ace Beaute Begonia palette. This palette, I really did like the formula, and I think it's a really pretty color story, but similar to the other 2, I just don't know that it's adding anything to my collection. I feel like I have this color story in other palettes, so it's not my favorite. I do think it'd be great if I like traveled more. This is a good, like, nice, easy travel palette, but I don't know. It's just not, it doesn't quite call to me. I don't know. I'm just not a huge fan. Next up, we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills. This is the Cosmos palette. This is what the palette looks like. I'm still working on my review of this one. I've used it twice, and there's a few more of the like special shimmer shades that I want to try out and see if I still feel like they're maybe worth it. But like the first look I did, I had such a hard time blending the mattes. I used kind of like the purpley. I used like Space Dust, Eclipse, and I think Dark Matter, and it was so patchy, so hard to work with. The second time I used the palette, I did a warmer look, and I really liked how that turned out. I thought it was really pretty. So I just feel like I'm like 50-50 on this one, and I don't feel like I like it enough, and I did have some issues with it to put it any higher. Every other palette that I've talked about so far, I do intend to declutter, so this will be probably the last time that you're seeing them, except for one, because I used it today, which is today, September 2nd. But anyways, when I'm filming this. So anyways, the Cosmos is the only one I'm not ready to declutter yet, because I kind of want to give it a few more chances to see if I like it. Next up is the Ace Beaute Flora palette. This is the one that I reached for today. This shade right here is on my inner corner, and I actually really like this one. Of the Begonia and Flora, this one is my favorite out of the two. I just don't see myself reaching for this particular color story often enough to make it worth it to keep in my collection. But if you like yellows and like warm tones, it's really pretty. Next up is and that's the Flora is the last one of the ones I'm going to declutter. Everything else I haven't decided I'm decluttering yet. Anyways, next up is the Viseart Petite Shimmer Coy. One shade's missing because I have it in I built my own Viseart palette, and I grabbed that one because it was perfect for kind of the color story I was going for. This is nice, but I've talked about this before, but the shimmers are, compared to like other, like the indie shimmer formula, or even like the newer Natasha Denona shimmer formula, it's just not quite as special. So I just felt like a little bit of a letdown from those shimmers. Next up, we have the Viseart Coyish Étendue, and this palette I like a little bit better. I do think the tones of these shimmers, this one honestly probably should have been in the next category, which is palettes that I like, but they don't like get me going quite as much as other palettes, because I do like this one. I've only played with it the one time, so I think that's maybe why I put it here. I don't know. I felt like it needed to be closer to the other Coy shimmer, but yeah. Oh, and then I usually like to mention which palettes were new to me or new for the month, so that you know what's like just now coming into my collection. I just think that's helpful to like get a gauge on how they rack and stack against palettes that I've had for a minute. So for July, oh, none of these were new in July, and I'm pretty sure none of them were new in August either. Okay, yeah, none of these palettes were new or new to me. So as I was just kind of mentioning, these palettes are palettes that, for the next category, are palettes that I like, but they're not quite like, I don't know, we're not quite there yet, you know? Like, we're just talking, we're flirting, we're not seeing each other yet. So the first one up in this category is going to be the Goblin King from Indie Beat Cosmetics. I have only had the chance to play with this once, maybe twice. And this palette, I really like the mattes. The shimmers, similar to the Viseart shimmers, where they're a pretty opaque shimmer, but they're not quite sparkly special enough. And I was a little bit disappointed because the Platinum Hits 3 palette that I have, those shimmers are stunning. So I was kind of expecting that from here. But the mattes are really nice. They did stain quite a bit, but that's not like my personal biggest issue. And I love the theming of this, the Goblin King, based on Labyrinth. So I think that one's really fun. I do feel like I need to play with it more before we can be in the next stage of our relationship. Next up is going to be the Melt Cosmetics Dark Matter palette. Oh, and I was gifted the Goblin King palette in PR, just an FYI. I will note which palettes were gifted to me in PR down below, but I think that might be the only one in this. So, anywho, affiliate codes will also be down below. I don't want to kill everybody by being like, oh, if you use my code, you can save blah, blah, blah each time that one of those palettes comes up. So if you're curious about which places I have affiliate codes, description box. Okay, keeping it moving. Next up, we have the Dark Matter palette. This is what this palette looks like. It's a really pretty neutral palette. It's not anything special. I'll be honest, and I don't know if it is like a, well, okay, let me backtrack for a second. I think you can get a really pretty smoky eye with this palette. However, I feel like the other palettes from Melt with the rectangle pans, except for Amore y Mariposas, because that has a circle pan, and I would argue that that matches the formula of the rectangle fans. I feel like, and this is where I'm like, maybe it's just an aesthetic thing, but I feel like those were better than like this and the Zodiac, the Bad Side Zodiac collection. Like those have felt really lackluster to me. So I don't know. I'm kind of disappointed in Melt right now. Okay, this is like a collection of singles, but technically the next palette is this palette, which I actually really love. I think I got this on Etsy. It's like a empty magnetic palette. This is what it looks like inside. I have like my Lethal Cosmetics 1-Up palette in here, plus quite a few of the Viseart Quad. So what I used is this shade, which is from the Viseart Quad, the pistache one. I like this. Technically, I don't reach for it that much because it's just like a collection of like random shadows from Lethal and Viseart, but there you go. I wanted to be honest about what I've been reaching for. Next up, we have the BellaBeauteBar Poison Garden 2 palette. This is what the palette looks like. Absolutely gorgeous color story. I just don't find myself reaching for it as often as I thought I would. And I felt like, up until today, I felt like I had really lost my creative mojo. Like I didn't really want to do anything except put like a neutral crease shade and like a shimmer on the lid, and that was the extent of like what I was feeling. Today I pulled out an older palette and then just felt this like spark of creativity to reach for and pull like new stuff into it as well. If you're curious, I'm wearing the Melt Cosmetics Beetlejuice The Waiting Room palette with a palette you'll see later, which is the Izumaya Beauty Industrial palette, and I'm using a Danessa Myricks Color Fix in Hot Fire. So I do feel, and the yellow from the Flora Story palette, but anyways, I did feel like this was, and to some of you this might not look that creative because it's still kind of the same eye shape that I always do, but I just felt like it was a really creative look compared to what I've been doing. But anyways, long story short, or long story long, I think I want to reach for this palette again right now and get a feel for if like now that I'm feeling more inspired, will I enjoy playing with it a little bit more. Next up is the Gloss Gods Cosmetics Gal on Mars palette. This is an all shimmer palette. It's really pretty. This is actually like what I've been pairing with, just like a neutral in the crease and then one of these shimmers on the lid, because they're kind of like neutral or neutral adjacent. But I think these are really nice. If you don't have a ton of like special multi-chromes or palettes that have a bunch of special shades, I think the Gloss Gods like all shimmer palettes are a really good way to get those shades in like one fell swoop, because they have a really nice formula on their shimmers, and they do have like a lot of shiftiness to them, especially in this Gal on Mars palette. Okay, next up we have the Huda Beauty Naughty Nude palette. So what I've been enjoying reaching for. I think this palette's really pretty. I don't know why I put it here. I ranked these when I was hungry, and I think we're seeing the results of that, because this one and like, I don't know. I feel like I like this one, so I don't know why I put it here. Yeah. Anyways, it is a neutral palette. I think it's really pretty. I like this kind of like packaging and size palette from Huda. Not a huge fan of her minis, but I think the quality on these is always pretty good. This next pile, we're gonna have to go in phases because a majority of them are in this pile. So as a reminder, this category is palettes that I really like. Like, they're just not holy grail favorites, but I really like them and would recommend them. So first one up, and let me backtrack for a second. Within each category, I feel like the order could sort of change depending on the day. Also, you're seeing that my mood is very heavily reliant upon if I've had food or not, because quite a few of the palettes I feel like I've mentioned, like, I probably could have moved that one up. But anyways, I'm putting them in order just because of that's how I felt in the moment of ranking them, but within each category, they could really shift around depending on the day or look that I recently did. Anyways, first up, we have the Delicious Delights palette from Cosmic Brushes. This is the, well, aside from Goblin King, this is the second like of the new palettes from July and August to me. So if you haven't seen the palette, here's what it looks like. I do think it's really pretty. And I was able to, my shade Charms broke and I was able to repress it. I mean, it made a giant mess, but, and it kind of, I don't know. Anyways, I was able to repress it and I think it looks better, usable, but I just don't feel like this palette went quite deep enough for me, and I'm not like a big pastel girly. So I don't like, and I haven't really reached for this one in the summer. Now that we're working our way into fall, I don't foresee myself really grabbing for that one all that often. Next up, we have two palettes. They're from the Unearthly Cosmetics mystery boxes. So if you don't want to see what was in the mystery boxes for their summer mystery boxes, then skip ahead. But at this point, I feel like they've revealed them on Instagram and everywhere. So I don't think they're a secret anymore. Anyways, so this one was also new. This was new for the month of August. The last one was July. But anyways, this is the Get Groovy palette. They just nail the packaging on these on these mystery boxes. They just, oh my god, they kill it. Okay. I was going to say, if there's only one place I could ever buy a mystery box from again, it would be Unearthly. But if I'm being honest with you, Unearthly really is the only place I buy mystery boxes from, because I just think the way that they do it is fantastic. But anywho, this was from the large palette, or large box. This is the palette looks like. It is definitely a very bright, summery color story, but I do feel like it goes a bit deeper with this like maroon burgundy shade down here, and this purple goes quite a bit deep as well. So it's giving like summery rainbow, but which it was part of the summer box, so I think that makes sense. But I like it a little bit more than the Delicious Delights palette. Next up is the Spaced Out palette, and this is from the small of the two summer boxes. I think this is a really fun color story. I haven't played with the greens yet, and I think they look really nice. The shade Shroom is my favorite. It's amazing. But yeah, I really enjoyed this palette. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to continue to use it. I think the artwork on this one's really cute. I just love the artwork that they pick out. I always think they do a good job with that. Next up, we have a not new palette. This is the Blend Bunny Cosmetics All Done Up palette. I bought this palette last year when it launched, and then I didn't end up reaching for it all that often. I don't know, but now that I'm moving slightly into a more neutral time in my life, I've been pulling this one out more, and this is a really good palette. I do enjoy it a lot. I think the shimmer formula is really nice. Obviously, the Blend Bunny mattes, in my humble opinion, always kill it, so there we are. Next up is the Jellywink Cosmetics and Makeup Tattoo collab. This is the Alchemy palette. I also got this palette in my Snarls box. This one, I adore the packaging and theming, and I really, really like this color story. And so far, I've had a good time with the shimmers. One of them creased, but you know, creasing happens. But the other one that I used, like I think it was this BBBBB one over here, so pretty, looked so nice, and was more shifty than I was expecting. But yeah, I really like this palette, really like this color story. Mattes are super pigmented. There is a little bit of a finessing that needs to come into play when you're blending them, but it's not anything too terrible, so I really like this one. Okay, next up we have the Melt Cosmetics 420 palette. If you've never seen the inside, this is what this palette looks like. Another color story that I adore, but the mattes require a little bit of finessing. Just like these greens over here, the dark one, Chronic, can get like a little bit patchy, but if you can make it work, you can make it work. I think these tones are perfect. Like, they're such a good matte like color tone. I just feel like it's so unique to my collection. I really enjoy grabbing this palette and then pulling in like shimmers. Like, I think I paired this with like a lavender shimmer, and it was one of my favorite looks ever. So yeah, I really like this palette. Even though it requires some finessing, I'm still a fan. I don't know if I'd call it a holy grail favorite, but it's really good. That's why it's here. Next up, we have the Unearthly Cosmetics Warms My Blood palette. This was the initial version that came out during Halloween last year. This is the inside of the palette. It's definitely a very what word am I looking for? What like neutral adjacent color story. There's a lot of reds. I'm not usually a fan of red eyeshadow. I know that's seems funny because I'm wearing it right now. I did have the shade Centuries, which is the shade down here. That's totally dried out, but every other shade still works for me. I'm okay with that because honestly, Centuries isn't like a shade that I reach for all that often, but I do believe they fixed that issue when they like relaunched it in like new packaging. I could be wrong on that, but anyways, I'm not worried about it. It's not keeping me from loving that palette. I just find that this palette I don't end up using by itself. Most of the time when I'm going into the palette, I'm just grabbing one of the really pretty shimmer shades in here. So I don't know if I don't know, there's something about this matte, although like the shade like this row right here, I think is a really pretty neutral color story. I think it's because these two purples and the reds sort of feel similar matte wise. So those turn me off, but I do think it has a really nice neutral matte color story in there. Okay, so this palette was new for the month of July. This is the Color of Rain palette from Gloss Gods Cosmetics. Here's what the palette looks like. There's some oil seepage. I think I mentioned it in a video when I talked about this palette before. These are the creamiest shimmers I have ever used in my life. They are so creamy, yet somehow smooth. So I think if you got this palette, you might want to blot the shades when you first get them to like soak up some of the oil. Personally, I didn't mind the oil because they looked really smooth and were super creamy and easy to use. I don't recall having really any creasing issues with this one. So anyways, I really like it. I think it's magical. And I doubt the camera's going to pick it up, but these shades are super shifty and I'm a big fan of it. Next up is the Gal on the Moon palette from Gloss Gods Cosmetics. This was new to me for the month of July. This is the lavender purple palette that I paired, or purple shade that I paired with the 420 palette. I think I used, I want to say, it looks like it was New Moon and Luna that I used because those look the most disturbed. But anyways, like disturbed as in like I messed them up basically. But I think this is a really pretty color story, and like I said, I really like the shimmer formula from Gloss Gods. Next up, we have the Scooby Doo palette from Glamlite. Let's see if we can show the fun packaging. This palette I do really enjoy. I like the mattes from Glamlite. I do feel like there are better shimmers in my collection, but their shimmers aren't bad. Like, I think some of them are really pretty. In fact, this one up here is a gorgeous, like, almost cinnamony neutral shade. I think it's really pretty. So I think it's pretty. I had a good time with this. There's stuff that I like more. Even though I absolutely adore Scooby Doo and think this is so fun, I just have some stuff that speaks to me a little bit more. Alrighty, still on this same category. I told you a majority of them were going to be in here. So next up, I have the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I'm sorry, I know that packaging's super reflective. My friend Daria from, I think her Instagram handle is A Variety of Distractions. Anyways, she did a like bronzy crease with a silvery toned, like purpley silvery shimmer, and it was like, specifically she included like these two shades, and she just felt like it really paired nicely. So then when I went to Vegas, I was like, I'm bringing bronze and I'm bringing the next palette that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to try and recreate like something similar, like inspired by the look that she did. So then I played with this and I was like, dang, I forgot how much I like the mattes in this palette. It's a really good one. So the palette that I wanted to pair with it is the Minka palette from Adept Cosmetics, and I was reminded by how much I adore Adept's shimmer formula, and also that I always just love the looks that I get from when I use the Adept shimmer. So anyways, I think it was the shade Minka was the silver that I paired with it, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I really like that palette. Next up is a new palette for the month of August. This is the Gourmande Girls Nightshade palette. I've honestly only used this palette the one time, but it was such a good experience that I wanted to rate it this high, and I just need to find time to play with it. Every look I see on Instagram with this palette, I'm like, oh my god, that's beautiful, and I end up putting it in my saved folder so that I can try and recreate the look later. But I didn't want to knock this one because I've only played with it once because I buy too much makeup, but I also couldn't put it as like a holy girl favorite when I've only used it one time. So that's why it is where it is. Next up is the Ensley Rain Cosmetics Strawberry Moon palette. the most recent video uploaded on my channel should be my 2 looks video with this palette, so go check that out. Like I said, I'll have it linked down below. These 2 shimmers down here are so shifty and magical and special, and they're amazing. But overall, really like the shimmers in this palette. I really liked how the mattes blended in this palette. They like almost blended themselves. They were very soft, very easy to use, still pigmented. I was a big fan of this. The only qualm I have is that you have like 3 blue shimmers up here that I feel like we could have gotten a little bit more variety on, and there's not really like a corresponding blue matte. Like there's like a teal matte, but then we have 3 like true blue shimmers. Anyways, that's my only issue with this one. And it's like nitpicky at that point. I'm just like, it's my own personal preference on color story. I think all the quality is great, and the blue shimmers I've paired with other blue mattes and other palettes, and they work really nicely. So there you go. Next up is the Lavender Skies palette. This was new for the month of July. I adore this palette. I think it's amazing. Like I said, they have a magical shimmer formula that's somehow very creamy, but also doesn't crease. And I think this color story, on first glance, you're sort of like, what am I supposed to do with that? But then whenever you like combine, you truly do get this like sunset-y experience with it. And I just think it's a gorgeous color story. Next up, we have the Shroud Cosmetics Peaches and Dreams palette. This was also new for the month of July, and I just spilled eyeshadow all over myself. Succulent and Glisten are like 2 of my favorite eyeshadows that I've ever used. I think this palette is amazing. I don't quite know what to do with this matte color story, but the palette is worth it for those shimmers alone. And I just think the packaging is adorable, so I really like it. Okay, next up we have the collab palette between Ellie Star, Brittany Huffman, and BellaBeauteBar. This is the Best Mattes palette, and oops. And I am forcing myself to use every shade while it's in its original color story, and then I'm going to move it around. I feel like I got some inspiration from it being set up like this, but I'm ready to put it in more of like a monochromatic organization, and I think I'll get more use out of it. But I think the matte formula that BellaBeauteBar is like going forward with is amazing and absolutely worth it. And I know that palette is giant, but I really like it. It might prompt me to finally get rid of some palettes that I've been holding on to for having sort of like a really fun, bright color story. I might not need them anymore because I have that now, but I'm not quite ready to part ways yet. So the next palette I have is the Sun and the Sea palette. This is also from BellaBeauteBar. I ranked this one higher just because it has really gorgeous shimmers in here that I'm absolutely obsessed with, but the matte color story in Best Mattes is slightly better. There are some redundant neutral shades. I feel like they're just like not quite different enough on the lid. I do like having neutrals with the blues and purples, but I feel like we could have gotten more depth and variety in these neutrals. This palette was new to me for July. Not new to me, but just new. I guess it's like a revamp palette, but anyways, it was new for the month of July. Next up, we have the Flower Moon palette from Ensley Rain. This one's like pushing into like Holy Grail territory. If I wore green shimmer more, I feel like it would be, but every time I use a shimmer from this palette, I'm like obsessed with how the look comes out, and I really, really like it. So I really like this palette. I think it's amazing. It's not quite on the level of Midwinter Dream from Ensley Rain. Like that's like one of my all-time favorite palettes, but this one's really good, and I really like the Ensley Rain formula. Okay, next up I have the Adept Cosmetics Nin Hydrin palette. I really like this palette. I do. I think the shimmers in this palette are really gorgeous, and I'm glad that I got re-inspired to pull out my Adept palettes because I hadn't pulled them out in a minute, and I like kind of felt like forgot like why I like fell in love with the brand as soon as I tried Plain Jane Remastered. I was like, it's sold, and bought every palette pretty much since then. So yeah, that Sumerian Sunset palette is going to be mine. Next up, we have the Lethal Cosmetics Wildflower. I think this is the Wildflower. This is the palette. It has a similar shade to Succulent in the Peaches and Dreams palette. This is also my favorite shade in this palette. I think it's gorgeous. I think the shiftiness of the shadows in this palette are really beautiful. I really like it a lot. I've had a good time playing with this one. Okay. This next palette was new for July. This is the Sugar and Grunge palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. This is the last palette in this category, and it's approaching Holy Grail status because I really like the pastel shades, and I like the color selections, especially as I'm in my slightly more toned down, more neutral look era. Obviously, that's not what I went for today, but that's what I've been going for. Like, I've continued to reach for this palette, because even when I've gone for like the purples or the greens, I feel like it's not super in your face, and it can sort of be like a toned down, what word am I looking for? Like, not quite subtle, because you're still wearing green or blue or purple eyeshadow, but it's like not quite like, bam, blue eyeshadow. You know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to say. But anyways, those are all the palettes that I like, but they're not Holy Grail favorites. Let's talk about the Holy Grail favorites now. First up, we have the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. I really like the tones on this palette. I thought this palette was really pretty. I think she did something special with the shimmer formulas in here. I know some people had issues with, I want to say it was Fushi, but Fushi and Calathea are her cream to powder formula of matte shades, and I feel like you either like that formula or you don't like it. It's personally one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas, so I felt like those worked like they normally do, so I was a big fan. But if you normally don't like that formula, there's 2 shades in here with it, and you probably won't like these shades. But I really loved the shimmers in this palette. I just really liked this palette a lot, so as I was using it. So I had a blast playing with this. I think this palette was new for July. Let me see. It was not. I thought it was, but it wasn't. Okay, next up we have the Lunar Beauty Life's a Drag Facelift palette. I can't tell you what it is about this palette, but there's just something about it that I really like. I love, here's what, okay, I've thought about it and now I can answer why I really love it. What I love is that it pairs perfectly with whatever palette I'm trying. Like, if I have a palette and I'm like, okay, this palette, I want to do this look, and I'm like, oh, I just need like something, like a shade that's not in this palette. It's like, this is the perfect go-to for me, that I'm like, oh, but this palette has the shade that I'm looking for. It's got a white, it's got a black, it's got like these, I don't know how to explain it, but there's like something about this palette that I'm like just constantly like, oh yeah, let me just grab that one. It'll work. It'll make this work for me. Next up is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. This palette was new for the month of August. This is what the inside of the palette looks like. I thought this palette was gorgeous. I thought the shimmer shades were super sparkly, super wet looking, super special. I really enjoyed the matte formula quite a bit. I think this is going to end up being a palette that is like my go-to to reach for work when I go into the office or have an important meeting and I don't want to look like this. I want to look a little bit more toned down. I think that's going to end up being my go-to because, I don't know, I just really like the tones of it. I think it's really pretty. Next up, which is also potentially a go-to work palette, this is the BellaBeauteBar Smoky Glam palette. I just really enjoy the color story on this. I think you have a lot of options. You even have some slightly colorful options like the greens and the purples to just mix it up a little bit. So I do really enjoy this palette. I think it's really gorgeous, and I think, like I said, BellaBeauteBar is killing it with this matte formula. Their shimmers, they were always killing it in my humble opinion, so they're still killing it. Last but not least is going to be number 1. This was new to me for the month of August. I was convinced by my friend, Daria, a variety of distractions on Instagram. I was convinced to pick this palette up. I really wasn't going to because I just thought and I have sparkles all over my dress. Okay. I wasn't going to because it is quite expensive, and I was like, I'm not gonna spend that kind of money on a palette. Like, I've bought the Bare Natasha Denona palettes that cost over $100. I've bought the Danessa Myricks like light work that costs over $100, but each time I've gotten those, I've bought them from Sephora with a Sephora gift card, so I didn't pay $100 out of pocket. I have never paid $100 or more on a single eyeshadow palette. I've yet to do that until this palette. I upped my threshold of money that I'm willing to spend on eyeshadow palettes. So here we are, the Isamaya Beauty Industrial 2.0 palette. I pretend that the packaging is American Horror Story themed so that I can move past it because I really don't like it. But this is the inside of the palette. Now, the reason that I'm putting this at the top of my Holy Grail favorites is because never in my life have I felt like I need to just continue to reach for this palette. I'm using this palette today. I'm using actually the shade, I think it's Polish. It's the shade like kind of right here-ish. Anyways, it is gorgeous. every single one of these shades is like, there's something special about it. Like, it just looks pretty. You add it to a look. It looks nice on the lid. It doesn't create a lot of texture. It's a very sparkle, very shifty, very pretty shimmer. I heard somebody describe this as a, like, all of the special shades from Pat McGrath, but like that, this palette is made up entirely of those special shades. I've got to be honest, I've never tried a special shade from Pat McGrath, at least allegedly one of the Bridgerton shades was, but I don't know about that. It wasn't that special. I would say these are better than that. So, but I haven't tried like a Mothership from Pat, so I don't want to say anything and like, you know, be wrong about that. So anyways, that's what somebody said. But I think this is so pretty. And if you want a palette, look, okay, let me tell you why I feel like this is potentially worth the money. Listen, everybody has different fund amounts. So, you know, for you, your eyeshadow palette threshold might not be at 100 plus yet. Mine hit it with this one. But the reason that I feel like this is worth it is because I have gotten to the point where I'm just putting bronzer in my crease in one of these shades on my lid. And that's it. And so when I don't feel like doing my makeup, like, this is it. This is what I want to use every day. Or when I don't have enough time to do my makeup and I want to do something quick and easy. Like, I don't even wet the brush. I just like dig my finger in here and put it on the lid and it swipes on, looks perfect, stays all day. Like, I just think there's something about that palette that is amazing. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts on it. But those are all of the palettes I used in July and August. I will do my best to never double up on this again because that was kind of a nightmare to rank and talk about. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let me know which palettes you've been using the most lately, which palettes of the palettes that I talked about, if we had similar opinions, different opinions, just throw your thoughts in the comments down below, not the description box. Anyways, check the description box. There's lots of information in there. That's it for me. I will see you all next time. Bye!